All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I've got our time straight up. So who wants to hit me with some gratitudes this morning? Gratitudes. How about it? All right. I'm grateful we are hearing some more positive news on the vaccine front. So that's encouraging. Hopefully the stock market will think so as well today. So if I don't have any other gratitudes, we'll just jump right in today.
I'm grateful my wife's covering my back while I figure out the real estate thing.
All right, good.
That's helpful.
Absolutely.
That makes two of us.
All right. Anybody else?
I am grateful for my health, for my family, friends, and for my office. We really have a good bunch of people here, and I'm grateful for them.
Excellent.
I'll back that up with what she said, as well as the good weather we're having still. So.
Amen.
All right, well, we're going to jump right in this morning. Again, we're covering Ninja Selling by Larry Kendall, and this is going to be our 12th week. So we're going to cover the seller process today, but just a quick review for a few things. Last week, we covered the buyer process. Any thoughts, or anybody use anything in this last week that we talked about from the buyer process? All right, who remembers the key things out of the funnel process? There's 3 of them. When you're going to use the funnel process discussion, does anyone remember what those 3 items are?
Don't miss anything. Look at everything. Don't pay too much. And have a rolling top 3.
There you go. Thank you, Judy. By the way, I came across this image that I found on a SlideShare program online. So if you like that funnel, you can just Google Ninja Selling Funnel Process and you can grab that. But I thought that was kind of interesting when that somebody had done on a shared presentation they did online. All right, today we're going to cover the seller process, and if you notice in the book, this is going to be covered on pages 266 to 294. But there's as we get down to items number 12 through 16, there's a little bit of difference on these, and it's a difference as to whether you're using the Focus First pricing tools or not. So these are the ones that are listed for not using that, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit at the end. But let's just jump on in here and talk about starting with the first step of the pre-listing interview. Now, I emailed this to you this morning because I didn't include this one on the email that I sent out Friday, so you should have it. But has anybody using this pre-listing interview or have used this in the past?
Something real similar.
Okay, great. I would just encourage you, especially when you're competing for a listing, but even when you're not, this has the opportunity to set you apart from other agents, because I know just over the years in using this and teaching it and preaching it, I've had agents tell me that they got the listing just by using this pre-listing interview. And they've had clients say things like, well, you've covered more things with me in this 10 minutes than my other person that came and shared stuff with me for 30 minutes. So let's talk about this pre-listing interview. One, you can just literally read this just as it's written. Don't feel like you have to recreate the wheel, so to speak. But I'll tell you, when I first saw this from Ninja Selling, some of the things that I thought about, like as it relates to these questions right in here on, about their house, how long have they owned it, the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, and all that other kind of stuff. You know, my thinking was these questions are too simple. These are questions that I can find that information in the MLS or my local tax database. But that's not the point. The point is there's a progression of questions here, and you're going from things that are easy to ones that are more challenging. So you're trying to help. It's a way that'll help build rapport. And you literally can go through these 2 pages of questions in 10 minutes, assuming you don't get off on a tangent. But, you know, when you're talking to somebody, you might just ask them that question right up at the top there. You know, if you've got about 10 minutes, I can cover this with you, or I can set up another time. But this will dramatically help you if you have this information before you go on the listing consultation. So Valerie, you said you were using something similar to this. What was your experience with it?
I always use it. It clarifies everything between me and the seller, and it gives us kind of a good path to start in for taking them to the next step, the meeting.
Great. Was there any questions, if you've had a chance to look over these, that anybody has a specific issue with, or maybe it presents a stumbling block to you?
You got to be thinking about, are you considering selling the home yourself?
That's certainly one of them. Whoop, got ahead of myself there. Yeah, so there's several of these in here that you know, people ask questions about. You know, are you interviewing other agents? Have you considered selling it by yourself? And, you know, I think these are questions that people may stumble with, but hey, the reality is right now, people could sell the home by themselves, or they could try to. They may run into a lot of roadblocks when it comes to inspections, the process, appraisals, those type things. But I would also remind you, and I just dropped it. There was a point that we covered a few weeks ago about in a hot seller's market, you really want to focus on the money that you might be missing instead of ways to save money. Okay, so in other words, if you properly market a house and you expose it to the general population, you may be able to get them a lot more than they could get by selling it on their own. So that's something that you could use there. Any other questions that presented yes?
Yeah, I always think sometimes, you know, there's 2 sides to all our questions or answers, or more than 2. There could be 10 ways somebody could take a question. So, you know, when you just brought up before this other comment about asking if there's other people they're going to interview, that, you know, sometimes can come back to bite you, because if they weren't, now you've opened it up and now they're thinking, oh, maybe we should interview others. Or I don't know, I just kind of wanted to talk about that. One thing I bring up, and I don't remember the exact way I say it, but something like, so is there anybody that you also feel like just kind of very loyal to that you've used in like the past, or something that you just kind of also want to bring into the mix? Or, you know, I kind of want to feel if they're just trying to use me for information and they're going to go use somebody they used before. So that can hurt too. Does anybody have thoughts on that?
Well, if you look at the NAR statistics on that home buyer, home seller survey that they do every year, does anybody remember what percentage of the people only talk to one agent?
50?
I think it's 92.
85.
Oh, yeah.
We're somewhere in the middle there. It's 75. 75% of the people only talk to one agent. So really my point of this question is, if they are interviewing multiple agents, I suggest that you be first. Okay? Because there are some chances that if you aren't first, you don't get to go. So I would suggest being first. Now, there are certain situations like relocation situations where they're going to be required to interview two agents in most cases. But I would want to, it's good. I believe it's good information to have. I believe most, some people have thought about it. But like I said, I'm not necessarily a stickler of making sure you cover every single one of these, but I would highly suggest just get used to it. Sit down with a friend in your office and just take 10 minutes apiece and go through there and just ask these and do it. If you do it enough times, you just get really comfortable with it. And, it's things like on here about, do you know what you're going to be asking for the property? Well, if you don't, if you ask, at least you'll have an idea instead of getting there. Now sometimes you get the answer of, well, that's why I was calling you, or that's why I wanted to hear about you. And so, but most of them have a ballpark idea of what they're going to be asking for the property. So it's good to know before you get there if they're thinking about a number that's realistic or not, or in today's market, maybe it's low. Any other? Yes.
Yeah, if you don't ask those questions, you run into the chance of missing something that they've done, like they've added a room, which adds square footage, or they've expanded an attic, or maybe they enclosed their garage to make a playroom out of it, and so they have less square footage. So that really helps you get closer to what they really have now and not when they bought it.
Good point. So if you had, let's just say they were, they've added on another bedroom and a bath. When you go to do your comps, if you don't know some of those things going in, you're comparing apples and oranges instead of apples and apples. So,
Hey,
great
Neil,
point. Yes.
there's so much to talk about. I love this list of the questions, but as you know, there's so much that we all can share. When you ask somebody about their past experience, I wanted to touch upon that, which you probably will, but it's really good to find that out, how it went. How did that last experience? Oh, we've sold lots of homes. Well, really, how, when you think about all the homes you've sold, what made, was there one that stood out to you that you would like to talk about? What made it so great or what didn't make it great? Because I want to make sure you're wowed. And I'd like to hear what you've been through a little bit, but I don't want you to relive your pain. But, what happened,
But if they did have a painful experience along the way, you want to make sure you don't step in there and repeat it. So
yeah, like if they don't like to declutter, I might not be the best one for them,
Yeah.
because if we don't stage the house, I might not sell it. So, but
yeah, like this is a good question here, number 14. What are 3 things you're looking for in a realtor? So
yeah,
I think those are great things. And if you know what those 3 things are, when you go on the consultation, I can guess 3 things that you ought to try to sell to, and that would be whatever the 3 things they're looking for. So, like I said, print this thing out, practice it with one of the people in your office, or or somebody. All right, number 2, pre-listing package. So this pre-listing package could come in a variety of formats, but you need to have something. So it could be as simple as taking the Crye-Leike listing presentation for your market and printing that out and binding it. And then you might also put in there a draft purchase and sale agreement, a property condition disclosure. You may go as far as putting in all of the listing paperwork. Their marketing has several of these home seller guides that are basically, some of those pages are going to look very similar to the listing presentation. Some of them will be, branded to you. So, I've got one that I had them do for me. I think I had them customize it, and I think I got 7 or 8 of them, and it was $100. So the more you change, a little bit more that'll cost, but you can also think about doing your own just with the Crye-Leike materials. Who is using a pre-listing package, and what else do you have in there that I may not have mentioned?
I think it's good to use some of your reviews, your testimonials. You can put that on the back of it.
That's a great idea. You might even.
I have a booklet that I use that I put together for every client, and they're not all different, but they are personalized. The marketing presentation, the cover page has their name on it. And then my marketing plan, which changes based on the price of the house. If it's not a luxury home, I don't put in that I'm advertising in the luxury portfolio. But that goes in every one, also with their name on it, that it's a marketing plan made for them. I'm sure they know it's boilerplate, but they like seeing their name.
Yeah.
And then I use some of the marketing materials from the Crye-Leike marketing presentation, and then I have some that I've used and tweaked since the 90s. So it's a hodgepodge.
Okay.
I
Who else has got some
yeah,
things they want to share? Go ahead, Valerie.
I was going to say, I like the idea of putting their name on it. I haven't been doing that, but I think what it's done for me is save an enormous amount of time when you get there, especially if you test them to see if they've really looked at it. And you assume that they have, and that way, when you go through the process, you could refer back to it and give them, just particulars about it. I'm assuming you've looked at my marketing plan, and do you have any questions about it? It just cuts the time down tremendously.
Good point.
And I actually take mine with them and give it to them while we're sitting at the table and go through it with them. And I tell them frequently, I'm not going to read all this to you. You can read it later, but they're always reading it as we go through. So that's worked for me.
That creates another just a simple question there. Do you send this ahead of time or do you take it with you? Now, I'm more of an advocate of sending it ahead of time if possible. But I would say don't send whatever pricing information.
Right.
So, and I'm an advocate for not sending it ahead of time, because some people come across like, aren't we paying you to do this work? I don't want to have to fill out all this forms. I don't have to, I know we're going to talk, but they look at this like it's homework in the middle of their life. And it's almost like they don't want to deal with all that. And I think sometimes I worry it could upset somebody and think, oh no, she's going to be here all night long, or he's going to be here all night long. So I almost want to just bring it along, kind of like what Pat said. I don't want to send it ahead of time. Doug, what do you think? Do you bring yours ahead of time?
I do drop it off ahead of time, but yeah, if you get a whiff of that somebody is simply going to be too busy to review any of this before you get there, then maybe not doing that is better. But I ask, I simply say that I'm going to be dropping off some information that I've prepared. It's designed for them to review it quickly. Do they think they'll be able to look it over? And I like the language actually suggested in the book there, where it kind of says, hey, if you've only got time to look at some of it, just look at the marketing part of it, and then maybe hit the highlights. You don't have to hit all 10 of the unique value propositions that Crye-Leike offers when you're there. You can maybe pick out 2 of them and tell a compelling story and then move on. If they're busy, then you definitely want to consolidate the whole process and not look like a problem person.
Mm-hmm.
Good points. So step number 3, the property walkthrough. You've got a few different bullet points here. Building rapport. You may, depending on how long ago you went through that pre-listing interview. Now, if it was yesterday, you may not have to do this as much, but if you've got one that you talked to a week before or more, you may just want to cover some of the highlights and make sure that you're on the same page. Or let's say you went over that with, let's say it's a couple you're dealing with, you went over that with one of them. It just may be worth going through some of those highlights of what they're looking for, so that you're covering it with both of them to make sure you're on the same page. Now, the qualifying the house part of this really has to deal with is there certain repairs maybe that need to be made, and are they willing to do them or not? That's really the point about qualifying the house. Does anybody have any specific stories on or ideas, thoughts, best practices on the property walkthrough?
I think today people or buyers are expecting a move-in ready. And a lot of sellers are saying, well, I know the carpet's a mess, but I don't want to, I'll give them money for it, or I'll do this, or I'll do that. And that's always an interesting one to deal with.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that move-in ready means they've got hardwood floors down where the carpet used to be, or something's been adjusted. Plus, they probably get a little more for the house if it's, in good fit shape.
Yeah. I like to use the term that it may be in their financial best interest.
Yeah, right.
To do, because she's right. Some people literally don't want to do anything. And then, some are willing to go the other, they're willing to do everything. So you have to kind of figure out what you're dealing with and determine what they're willing to do or what they want to do.
I think that's the time you pull out the comps when you're sitting there with them and talking about, these folks didn't do anything and this is what they got. And how does your home compare, and this is what these folks got with the updated kitchen and bathrooms and, nice hardwood floor. And it's basically the same house. So, it's just so black and white when you go that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. It's good to be able to see the photos if you have those available of those. Especially if you have one that was, very updated, one that maybe wasn't so updated. A lot of times you can see that very clearly in the photos.
And you could just ask them, which one resembles your house the most,
Hey, how do you convince a seller to spend that money to update their house if it's, say it got the whole 70s vibe and it needs to be updated to 2020 and they need to spend the money to get it up to market value, and they, how do you convince them to spend that extra money knowing that, they could possibly not have it,
We're gonna cover that in this next slide. The last thing I wanted to mention on property walkthrough is when you start, you'll occasionally have people that want you to give them feedback as you're walking through the house. Now, I would just caution you, maybe don't do what I have done in the past and just start blabbing and telling people everything they should do as you're walking through the house. Because I have literally made a seller cry before. And so that experience has stuck with me, and it has made me pull back and ask for permission. And sometimes I even do this a couple of times. Mm-hmm. So I might say something like, C. Lauren, is it okay with if I share some ideas on how we could improve the property and maximize this potential for you? And then yes, and then now are you sure you? And usually then at that point they'll say, no, I want you to tell me what I need to do. And you can kind of tell if you're dealing with somebody who is not going to change anything, or somebody who is willing. So Beverly, go ahead.
One thing that I found, maybe it's just me, but I feel like if you give them all the information that they need, they may not need you anymore. So sometimes it's like, well, we'll get the listing and then we'll sit down and we'll do everything that we need to do.
I like that too, Beverly. So sometimes I'll give them a couple of ideas and then say, once we've agreed to work together, we agree that it's going to be a good fit between us, then I'll come back and we'll go through room by room and I'll give you some suggestions. Or then I'm going to have my stager come in if that's something that you do.
Right.
So I think you have to kind of ride that fine line of providing some information, but not giving away the store before you know if you have a listing or not.
Yeah.
And I
Hey,
think helping-
Neil. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I use the word depends a lot, and I'm not referring to adult diapers. If they say, well, should I, we don't really want to spend the money to replace the carpet, and look, we've got all our stuff in, it'll have to be moved, and we're packing and everything's in the way. I'll say, well, it just depends on what your priorities are. Would you rather have more money or more convenience or less stress, or whatever the issues are? We don't really want to paint our whole house. Well, would you rather have more money or not have to deal with it right now? And sometimes they don't want to have to deal with it. They'll give up the money for the convenience. But that way, I'm not saying you need to do this. I'm telling them that they've got the option and they need to think about what their priorities are.
Good point. Great segue into the step 4 here. What are we selling? So is it, as taking Pat's line of answering there, it depends. Do you want to sell this retail or do you want to sell it wholesale? It depends on what kind of shape. If the house is in really bad shape, if it's in bad enough shape that it won't go through FHA financing, or it may not even go through conventional financing, then it's probably more of a wholesale. But I think if it's some things that you're doing, suggestions as far as staging or other things, improvements, simple improvements, having some before and after photos could be helpful. And then just again, if you have some of those other houses in their neighborhood that have made certain improvements, you can show them what they were able to get for their house, and ones that didn't, obviously, are going to probably sell for a lower price.
Neil, have you run into people wanting to do allowances for whatever reason? I've had several recently that, they didn't really want to do the work and kind of wanted to say, well, let's see how it goes. Maybe we can offer an allowance for carpet or paint or something else in the house. Have you run into that a lot, or how do you typically deal with the allowance people?
I typically like to use Steve Brown's comments of the blunt allowances don't really work.
Right.
And in today's, I would just say something along the lines of, in today's market, I don't really believe allowances work very well because the first showing of your property is online. Okay. And so people are going to make a decision on whether they even want to see your property in the first 60 seconds or less. And then once they actually come to see the house, they're probably getting that impression within the first few minutes. And many buyers in today's market want a move-in ready home. And so it's, I believe if it's something simple, like let's say it's a flooring allowance, Doug, I would say something simple like, I believe it's in your financial best interest to replace that floor before we put it on the market. Now, it makes a difference as to what you're going to replace it with. Are you going to put the same carpet that was there, or are you putting, you probably don't need to go to the extent of putting a nail down hardwood floor in there unless you're at, a certain price point where having something else in there wouldn't really be appropriate. But I just tend to tell them that allowances, I don't think they really work in today's market. I would like some other thoughts though.
Has anyone used Curbio? Do you know what Curbio is?
I think is that the one that will do the improvements and then they can pay for them at closing?
Yes. It's like a minimum of 15,000 in renovations that are required. But they guarantee that it adds the value back and then more, or they won't do it. I've talked to them extensively, and I've talked to several people that have used them and been very, very happy. And if
What
you
is
don't have
the
to
name
pay
of
for
that?
it until closing, you know, it just seems you get a whole lot more money for your house.
What is the name of that again?
Curbio. And you could go online to, you know, if they've got a big website. You have to have a 15,000 minimum. So that's, you know, kitchen maybe, or 2 bathrooms.
Yeah, I think we have somebody here in the Memphis market, but they don't go by that name, Neil. It's somebody
Didn't
else.
Scott
So it's
send
not
us
it.
somebody
Yeah,
like
I think
that?
there's one in home services, and I don't.
And they
I'm
use
not,
Landmark Construction here.
Do they
Right,
charge?
Scott just sent us something on that.
Yes.
Do they charge up front, or these people put a lien on the property, you know, a UCC, and then it's simply paid off when you go to close? Makes it easier on the people.
Okay.
I was going to bring that up as well. I think that's a great idea, as long as it adds up to that, you know, minimum or more. It's a great idea. And somebody else, if that was Doug or somebody, asked about what do people do if they can't, not Doug, but somebody else who asked, what do they do if they cannot afford it at this point? This is where I bring up financial options like a HELOC loan. And I've done that quite a few times this past year, where I had folks get a HELOC set up. So then we can prepare the home, and then we pay that off when we sell the house, or getting a 0% financing interest rate on a credit card. If they have good credit, they can do that. You know, there's different ways to approach not having the cash flow.
Right.
HELOC.
Yeah, home equity line of credit.
Yes.
Something you can do through your local bank.
Gotcha.
All right. Any other thoughts on this? We're going to go ahead and move on. Oh.
Another thought, Neil, that sometimes might work is they can offer, let's say, new carpet at closing, have some samples out of the quality of carpet you're willing to put in, or hardwood or whatever, and say this will be installed prior to closing. And you get to pick your color or style.
Yeah, I think that would be to me, that would be a backup if you just can't get them to do it.
Well, that's the middle option.
Yeah, maybe that's a middle option. Great point, Pat. All right, number 5 is just quickly making sure you ask the question, do they have other properties to sell? Maybe if they're moving out of a area, maybe they own some other properties in that area. And if they're moving across the country, for example, they may not want to have a rental home that's 300, 400, 500 miles away. So that's a good question to ask. Number 6 is what Larry refers to as the calendar. And this is just simply get you a very simple, clean looking blank calendar to keep with you. And that way you can look at scheduling. And so the idea here is that you're trying to clarify that time and schedule, and also that you're going to shift some of that focus from price to schedule. Because, and then again, it kind of comes up to that option. Some people value their schedule more than they'll value the price. Some people may be the other way around, but you just need to kind of work backwards from when they would like to have that transition done. You know, then you're going to have to go back 30, 45 days for closing to a contract. How long is it going to take you to get it under contract, et cetera. But I would, practice that with a calendar just so you're comfortable walking through it, so that you can tell people, when they might need to put that house on the market to get to wherever they want to be on the right time. Anybody using the calendar as you go through your listing consultation right now? All right, next we hit this a little bit before. As you're going through that pre-listing package, focus on your qualifications and your marketing plan. If you can't, if those are the only 2 things you get to cover, I would cover those. I wouldn't necessarily go through, especially if you have one of those 30-page pre-listing package. Don't feel like you've got to hit everything in here. I know I was at a listing presentation one time, and I realized I was droning on too far when the guy just stopped me and said, "Neil, you're the only realtor we know in town. And so at that point, I just decided, okay, let's just go right to signing the paperwork. So do a better job at reading your customer than I did on that one. Ask if there's any other questions. Now, I bring up this, Larry talks about this NAR survey, and I think I've got a couple of slides in here of it. And really, you can just focus in on one category here. But these are questions: what sellers want most from real estate agents. Okay, so my point here is that at some point when you're going over that package, you should cover these top few items and make sure you're going to say that you're helping them do some of those top 4 or 5 items. Or maybe you just get the language down to where, you could say something like, Mr. or Ms. Seller, most people are interested in me helping them market their home to specific buyers and selling it within a specific time frame and making sure we maximize the price. Are those things that you're concerned with, or are there other things that you really are looking for that I can help you with? So find out. Maybe you ask a question here, what's most important to them, and then you can address that. Anybody using these questions or have some specific questions that you use during your listing consultations? All right, so this is basically just a question after you've presented that information to them. Just ask them, based on the information in the package, do you feel that we are qualified to market your home? Step 10 is you're kind of working your way towards the pricing question. This is where some of the Focus First pricing tools are probably a little bit more visual than whatever it is you're covering with your comparable sales information. Again, I would just caution you, be careful with how many MLS sheets you start throwing in front of potential clients, because these are things that you're used to looking at and they're not. So sometimes we just start showing them a lot of different pages of MLS sheets thinking that they get it, and it can be confusing. So when you start to do that, think about doing it in ways that are very clear as to what it is you're trying to show them with those different properties. So when you get to the point about fair market value, are you willing to list your home at fair market value? And you may want to adjust that question slightly based on your personality and your client. But this is a chart out of one of the Focus First pricing. This is their scattergram. And basically what this is showing is those blue dots represent properties that have closed. And that red line, if I averaged all those properties, that is my fair market value. So, and you see prices on the left, square footage on the bottom. So if I had a 3,500 square foot house in that neighborhood, ideally it's probably going to sell at that roughly 460-ish price point. Now, if they have a house that is above the market in their area, it's going to be one of these properties that's above the line. If they have a property that's below condition of other properties, it's probably going to be, one of these below the line instead of above the line. So, and what's interesting is this example here, they're a little bit more, a lot of neighborhoods are much more black and white than this one is. But generally, when you nail into or you drill down into these specific properties, you can see that, maybe this property that's way above the line, maybe it's got one of those $150,000 backyards with an incredible pool and some other amenities. That's generally what you'll see. Has anybody used any of the Focus First pricing tools before?
Hey, Neil, I haven't, but is this like a template on this website that you could kind of purchase and plug and play? Basically
you purchase this, it pulls information. Basically it works along with your MLS. So you're going to pull an MLS search down, and then it imports the information over into this. Basically, it's an Excel product, and it creates these charts and graphs in Excel. And believe me, I'm not here to sell you on Focus First, but it's something that you should check out. And then whether you decide to use it, great or not. But in today's market, it may not be as hypercritical as when we work back towards a more balanced market. But in most cases, it's a very visual product, and it's kind of easy to understand. But I know that it's something else to pay for, and you may or may not want to do it. But the way I look at it is, if it cost you a couple $100 a year, if it got you one more listing a year, it would certainly be more than worth it.
I think
Yeah,
Barb
I've seen some of
Fraser
these.
uses it. I think Barb Fraser uses it. I think.
Okay.
Does that do anything other than look at the price? I mean, does it look at condition, et cetera, or is it just numbers?
That one is really just looking at it on price and square footage, Pat. There are some other pieces in there where it compares, like if you look at some of those other questions in the book, it talks about like, what are your odds of selling? So there's some other charts that say, how many houses were for sale in a given area or neighborhood or price band, what sold, what didn't sell. And so some of those pieces in today's market are, really in most of the markets across our footprint, if you're pricing a house reasonably, it's selling today. So, this may not be quite as important as it is when you get back to a more balanced market, or you have things that aren't selling. But we have inventory in a lot of our markets that is almost in days instead of months right now. So, but hey, if it helps you win a listing, then it would be worth it. So, all right, next item 12 on here is based on current market conditions. Whoops, sorry about that. Got a little quick on the draw. Based on current market conditions, do you feel that price would get you to your new place on time? So if they're moving from, in this case, point A to point B, that's where you should kind of gear your questions around. Do you think it's going to help get you there? Because again, back to Pat's comment earlier, some people are going to view condition as, or conditions and convenience is rather the word I was looking for, convenience over money. And that timing may be more important to them than maximizing the price of the house or the value of the house that they are able to get out of it. And then what is do they feel that's going to get you there on time? And what is their plan B if it doesn't? So, that obviously kind of gets people into thinking, well, if that doesn't work, what is that plan B? Now, if it's somebody who's just selling locally and there's not a lot of motivation there, this may not be an issue. But if you've got somebody that wants to get into a certain school district before school starts in January or school starts in August, then this could be a very different question. Or they're moving out of town for one of their jobs and they need to get there by a certain date, then that's going to make a big difference here. All right, so if you think that price is too high, then you might ask this question: if we get to that date and your house is sold, what will we do? What's your plan? So like I said, if you've got somebody here that's not motivated, they may not care. They may just say, well, I'll wait till the market catches up to that price, or it's not that big of a deal. But if you've got somebody who isn't that way, then you may have a more motivated seller. What are some of your other ways that people are saying this, if you feel like somebody's price is going to be a little bit too high for that given area, or maybe the condition that they currently have it in.
Neil, I don't do it often, but one thing I've done before is play The Price is Right.
Well, that
If
looks
you
like
get-
what this Price is Right logo
Yeah,
on here.
Do you want to win what's behind the curtain? Or, if you go it over the price, then you're not going to win what's behind the curtain. It depends on the sense of humor of the people
Right.
and their age.
Well, I think you need to have a little story that you can relate to this. I think would be helpful. But if you've all seen it, you've got houses in your marketplace that they get priced at a unrealistic number, and they just sit there. And many of you on this call have probably had one of those houses at one point in your career. And there's an old saying that I like. It's like you need to be the first love, the second wife, and the third listing agent. Now, not true in today's market on the listing agent. You want to be first. But if somebody's pricing it at a crazy, ridiculous price, it may not be worth it. Actually, Larry talks about in the book about having what he calls a walkaway price. So at some point, there is probably going to be a price that you shouldn't take a listing, or you won't take a listing. Good knowing that on the front end when you go in, so that you can be prepared. But
Hey, Neil.
listing inventory is so thin right now that most people will take it. Beverly, go ahead.
One thing I found is that people, sellers, usually think if they can't get this exorbitant price, it's because of the agent. It's not because they're being unrealistic. But one thing that I've said to try to get them to reevaluate that is to tell them, in a perfect world, if we could get a buyer that's willing to buy your house at $425, and even though the value is at $375, I let them know that we still have, unless they've got cash to pay for this house, through the loan process, they have to have an appraisal. And if it doesn't appraise, then we can lose everything and start all over, including market time that's been lost, tied up with this buyer that's not going to be able to buy the house. And sometimes that gives them a little pause to think about it, or at least to start self-doubting themselves.
Yeah, there's one of the pages in my pre-marketing packages. It actually covers these factors and who controls it. So one of the examples on there is like condition of the property and the price, that the owner controls it. The agent has marketing of the property and negotiating skills, but like Beverly said, if it's at an unrealistic price, no amount of marketing in most cases is going to fix that. So and hey, we see houses that are having to jump that appraisal hurdle right now, and there's that's coming up quite frequently because people are bidding over the list price. So, all right. Next item here is, I think I skipped one, or my slides are out of order. All right, the next 72 hours. 15 is actually what if it sells today. I think I've actually got that in here. But if we can find a buyer for your house in the next 72 hours, you're going to be okay with that. And then a few other questions around that. What if it's the first person who looks at it? So has anybody had this come up recently, where first person that looks at a house makes an offer and then the seller has second thoughts?
Yeah, I just had that. I had a house in Cordova listed at 260, got almost no showings, which really surprised me. I thought it was well worth that. But we dropped it to she dropped it to 250. And all of a sudden it started showing, and I got an offer pretty quickly, really good offer. and she had a bunch of showings lined up, and she said, "Do you think we should just keep showing it?" And I said, "Well, how many of those agents do you think are going to bring offers? Can you guarantee it? Do you want to lose this one?" And I said, the old bird in the hand analogy is not there because it doesn't mean anything. And she ended up going with it, but I really had to talk her into it. Part of it was her brother whispering in her ear that she could get more.
Yeah, and she had it on the market for more than it wasn't getting shown, right?
Well, it was only on the market for like 8 or 10 days. In a normal market, that would be no big deal. In today's market, it should have gone quicker, I thought,
Right.
and would have if we'd had it priced right to start with.
So
Hey,
I go ahead, C. Lauren.
I always like to cover and put it on a checklist when I first meet folks. You know, hey, we all discuss the market, how fast it's moving, but I always like to cover how are you going to feel if I sell your house in 3 days, or would you rather me show it 53 times and wait 2 months to sell your house? How are you really going to feel if the first person goes above full price or more? You know, you got to think about this. How do you feel, or what do you think about? You got to see where they're at, because some people think the first person to write it up, you know, studies have shown. I mean, there's so many ways to talk about it. I just thought I'd shoot that out there.
Well, I think it's good if you can have a story to back this up. And if you're new and this is one of your first listings, use a story from somebody in your office. It doesn't have to be your story, but I think it's especially important when you have people that, let's say you're in a very competitive price point where there's just not much on the market and you think it's going to have a lot of activity. It's important to ask that question. Are you going to be okay at that? Let's just say it's $250. Are you going to be okay at that $250,000 price point if the first person that looks at it writes us an offer for $250? Is that going to be okay with you? Because when I say the story here, you may have to say something like, in general, across our market, there's more demand than there is homes available right now. So there are buyers that are out there just waiting for another listing that matches their criteria to come on the market. So don't think that just because we get an immediate offer, it may be that we've underpriced the property. There's people literally sitting out there waiting for homes to come on the market. So, you know, you just need to cover that, because some people just feel like especially if they haven't sold a house in a while, they're going to feel like if it's the first person that most people are going to have a thought there, did I underprice it? And you're just trying to avoid this on the front end.
And Neil, that's why I think that having a really well-prepared net sheet when you go into a listing interview is crucial, because you can have that bottom line. And once you get that offer, if it hits their bottom line, especially if price is their number one priority, then you can kind of have that as backup as well.
Yeah, so if you're working on that net sheet, then it could be, and obviously you're going to have that figured out with their help on what their net's going to be. But if it's in that, and I like to be cautious about, there are some people that use net sheets all the time. There are some people that will do it in ranges. It just depends, but I try to like to do it within a little bit of a range, so that you're not nailed down to, they're going to net $6,022. So if it's anything less than that, then they're unhappy at the closing table. But you may just want to say something like that. And let's just say it was $50,000. Are you going to be happy with a net if we can net you $50,000 in that range out of the house? Would that be okay with you if it was the first person that looked at it? Something like that. I mean, I had one this summer where it was we put it at what we thought was the upper end of the range, and literally the first person that showed it made an incredible offer that had everything they wanted, and they went ahead and took it and canceled the other showing. So it's good to have those conversations up front. And then the last part about that 72 hours is also prep them for what you think is going to be the current activity based on that price point. So let's say it's one of those very competitive price points in your area, then you're going to probably need to look at what kind of showing activity are you expecting. So if it's going to be one of those where you really think it could have 8 or 10 showings in a day or more, you may need to say, hey, we're going to limit our showings to 15 or 30 minutes. And, if possible, we may want to put this on the market on a Thursday or Friday. And you might even consider going out of town for a day or two just to make it easier on them based on that showing activity. What conversations are you having with sellers around this today? And I was talking with somebody in the office this morning about that there are certain price points where if people have to sell the house that they're currently in to move up to the next house, fortunately, some of these people in these markets that are very competitive, they may have to make 2 moves and maybe move into an apartment or somewhere in with family temporarily till they can find the next house. I know that's certainly something that we're seeing more of, because in those competitive price points, trying to have a contingency to sell is pretty challenging in most cases.
I know a mortgage lender who actually sold his house and had to move into a condo, and I don't think he's found a house yet. I think he's still living in renting a condo. And I'm sure renting a condo is more expensive than buying a house at this rate, especially in Midtown.
All right. Any other discussions about how you're telling people to prep for that first 72 hours?
I'm telling them to be prepared to not be home for 3 days because their house may be shown constantly.
Yeah. So if you got people with pets or kids, really trying to put it on the market at a time where they are more flexible, and that might be on a weekend if they're working, but literally trying to get people to either board the pets and or if they've got kids, maybe they just go out of town for a night or two somewhere and try to work on it that way, and that certainly can make it more convenient for them. All right, the last point I wanted to talk about here was his concept of pricing on the bridge. And really, when he says this, the idea here is that consider pricing on even numbers, and this is going to be based on people's price ranges. So let's say that basically I did the comps. I think the number might be 290, 295, or maybe it's 305. His suggestion is that we consider pricing it, say, right at 300, which could catch people that were looking in that price point between 250 and 300, and between, say, another buyer that was looking between 300 and 350. So that's when you hear in the book him talking about pricing on the bridge, that's what he's talking about. Now, I know there's some people that maybe disagree with this and they say, no, I'm going to go just under 300. I'm going to price it at 299.9. It's just a thought. In certain categories on pricing, it may not matter a lick. Other ones, if you're kind of between those major price points that people are looking in, it may benefit your person to price it on that, right on that, in this case, 300 number. Some of your thoughts about pricing on the bridge, what are they?
Well, I just dealt with that on the one we reduced. I suggested 250 and she said, well, what about 249.9? And I just explained to her that most people look for homes on the internet and they don't get to put in, I'm looking up to 249.9. I'm looking 2 to 250 or 250 to 300. And when you price right in the middle, you get both the lower and the higher end shoppers.
Exactly.
I always talk about when I have buyers that typically when they give me a price range they're looking for, I always input it a little higher than that price because, we are going to do some negotiating. You may not offer at list price. And I think people look that way. And so I talked to my sellers about, that bridge pricing.
Good points. Anybody else? All right. Well, that's going to wrap us up, and I may come back in after the first of the year with some other ninja skills groups, but that has made us all the way through the book. If you have any other questions, certainly don't hesitate to reach out to me. My contact information is on the screen. Feel free to send me a text, shoot me an email, whatever, and I'll be glad to help you out with anything I can. I appreciate all of you that have been with us for this past 12 weeks and going over ninja selling. And I just encourage you to stay out there and keep using those ideas, and don't worry about just if you fall off the wagon a little bit on the Ninja 9, just get back up the next week and start over again. So